No matter what happens, women's are most affected. So, right here. Washington Post headline says Zoom fatigue hits women's harder than men because, of course, it does. And then if they dared say something hits men harder than women's, every single woman would be crying about it. Well, you think I don't count? Now, this story reminds me of an old joke about what the headlines would be in the nation's major newspapers should the world be ending. The Wall Street Journal, world to end, Dow Jones plummets. The New York Lies, world to end, history of the world, pages D1 through D42. The Washington Compost, world to end, women's and minorities hurt the most. Now, the Washington Compost and regressives in general only ever have two stories about women's. Women's can do anything men can do and probably better, so shut up, you sexist pig. And women's are weak and frail and in need of special help and accommodations, so shut up, you sexist pig. Kind of like how they don't really enjoy being reminded that, hey, if you're so strong and independent, why are you taking all these tax dollars that are basically mostly put in there by men? It's almost like you're not actually independent. You just replaced a husband or a boyfriend with the government, huh? Whatever. So this article squarely falls into the latter category. Also, shut up, you sexist pig. The concept of Zoom fatigue came into vogue early in the pandemic with the explosion of video conferences and refers to the fact that people hate to be on video conferences all day. No shit. I would still greatly prefer this over meetings in person, though. Because I'll say this again, man. Ever since I started working from home, I've actually grown to love meetings. Because if I'm stuck in some useless meeting, it's not like when I was back in the office, when I was fighting to stay awake physically in that meeting room, and they explicitly forbade me from bringing my laptop in there and actually doing my job. Because, oh, you need to focus on the meeting, even though you're only here in case anyone needs to ask questions. It would be so rude to the speaker if you weren't paying attention, because no one cares about how rude it is to me that they're wasting my time with pointless shit, but whatever. It was pretty bad. But now that we're doing all of our meetings, obviously through like Microsoft Teams or something, or Zoom, whatever, I could do productive things during meetings, like grind in video games. So please keep scheduling me for more meetings. Fill up all 8 hours of my day. I don't care anymore. I'll just find more games to play. I'm going to start really just getting to work on that backlog. Maybe I'll boot up Factorio. I'm not sure why that needed a special name. It's not as if anyone has conducted a study on Brian Stelter fatigue, that brain fog that envelops you whenever you watch Brian Stelter for more than 5 minutes. Oh, shit. So remember I talked earlier about how CNN lost 2/3 of their viewers? Brian Stelter lost almost 3/4 of his viewers. Oh, that's great. There, see, I already feel more tired. The Compost article reports on a recent study titled Nonverbal Mechanisms Predict Zoom Fatigue and explain why women's experience higher levels than men. Well, it's almost as if men are better at coping with stress, huh? Written by Christopher Shia, who prior to his gig at the Washington Compost worked at Vox, so you know you're getting the unvarnished truth. Yeah, you know you're getting some top-tier urinalism right there. Now, the article is a transcription edited for clarity with an interview over Zoom, of course. So, question. How much video conferencing did you find the people that you surveyed were doing? And answer. We looked at the frequency, we looked at the average duration, we looked at how much time people had in between meetings. The mean for frequency was a bit less than 4 meetings per day. The mean duration was around 45 minutes to an hour, and they had about half an hour between meetings, a measure we call burstiness. As someone who has to kind of get warmed up and get in the zone to really do work, it's kind of funny how my own manager is going out of his way to make sure that I have like the least conductive to my success or my productivity environment I possibly could. It's great, isn't it? And then when I complain about it, he's like, well, these other guys are doing it just fine and not complaining about it. So, okay, boss, whatever you say. Yeah, I could be giving you a good 30% effort, but you're ensuring the most I can ever give you is 5%. And hey, you know what? I gave you a chance to fix that. But if you insist on forcing me into the same system as everyone else and not acknowledging that people are different, all right, whatever. I'm just going to milk paychecks until I don't need that job anymore. Fine with me. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty confident that when it comes to exploring gender differences in burstiness, we're leaving China in the dust. Yeah, we got some important things going on. I tell you, we are going to own the field of video conferencing fatigue technology. For a little more detail, let's take a quick detour and look at the paper itself. This study empirically tests 4 rhetorical predictions using the Zoom and exhaustion fatigue scale. I know it's still early, but I don't think I'm going too far out on a limb here to say that Zoom and exhaustion fatigue scale is going to go down as one of the most important developments of the, current century. A turning point, if you will, in video conferencing call history. Yeah, these guys, they may be saying it sarcastically, but it is current year. We predict that fatigue is associated with higher amounts of video conference usage and nonverbal mechanisms, that women's will have more fatigue than men, and that the mirror anxiety mediates the gender difference. We'll revisit these predictions later. For now, let's return to the interview. Question. Women's reported roughly the same number of Zoom meetings as men, but women's meetings tended to last longer and women's had less time between meetings. Are you implying that women's just can't shut up? Are you implying that they're just yapping and dragging out these meetings? That's very sexist of you. And for the women that do this, kind of a self-inflicted problem right there. Like, actually, we're supposed to have quick, like 10, 15-minute stand-up meetings every morning at where I work. They usually go around 2 hours. And why is that? Well, I try to limit my part of it to like 5 minutes, but then my boss gets involved and he starts asking questions. He starts expanding on things. And before you know it, my section of that meeting ends up being an hour long. But yet one key finding was that women's reported being more tired even after equal amounts of meeting time. So you don't have as much stamina, huh? All right. And then answer, exactly. About 14% of the women's reported feeling very or extremely fatigued, while only 5.5% of the men reported the same level of fatigue. Overall, women scored 14% higher on Zoom fatigue. So are you kind of low-key admitting that women's aren't cut out for the workforce? Because that's the impression I'm getting from this. While the study was never designed to answer the question, where there did not seem to be any curiosity at all over why women's would have longer meetings and shorter breaks, or how that would even be possible. No, it's a complete mystery why that happens. I'm pretty sure corporate America went co-ed a long time ago, and so would assume meetings routinely include both men and women's and the 69 other genders. So how did women's have longer meetings? Yeah, that is a good question. If meetings contained both men and women, why are these women's meetings longer? Unless the men do like what I do. As soon as the meeting gets to the Q&A section, that's when I leave. Because you guys know, if you've been through one of these corporate meetings, that the meetings say it's an hour long, and then you get to the Q&A section, and it's 2 hours of usually one fucking idiot asking questions that were answered during the hour-long meeting/presentation, but he wasn't paying attention. No reason for anyone else to stick around for that. So data gathered was all based on participants' responses to a survey, and so was self-reported. It was an opt-in survey, so they tested their results with a smaller randomized sample, but people were still self-reporting. Yeah, self-reporting, that usually leads to problems. I did not see any suggestion in the paper that women's could simply be overestimating the length and burstiness of their meetings. That would have been an interesting question. It would certainly be understandable that if women's indeed felt more fatigued from meetings, their perception of length and breaks in between meetings would be exaggerated. The way in which a clock seems to tick backwards when you're in a really boring science class or in a really lengthy paper or on Zoom fatigue, or you're in one of these meetings. Question. Overall, you found that something called mirror anxiety accounted for much of the gender difference. Explain that. All right, interesting. Here's the answer. We know from previous research that people will more likely evaluate themselves when they see a mirror image of themselves. A mirror makes you more susceptible to comparing yourself with others or with some ideal of how you should look, which can lead to negative effects such as bad mood, anxiety, or depression. We also know from prior research that this tendency for self-awareness in front of a mirror is greater among whammons. Most of that earlier research involved short-term exposure to a mirror, but now with video conferences, we're in front of ourselves for hours per day. So basically, because you're on video and you can see yourself as part of the call in some setups, you're actually, are you implying that these women like squint at themselves in the corner of the screen there? I don't know. And have you seen what most women in America look like these days? They are clearly not very concerned with their looks. This is a Zoom version of, does this conference make me look fat? I'm going to answer that right now. The conference, the camera, what you're wearing, it does not make you look fat. Your gigantic ass does. All that flab hanging over your belt does. Your 6 chins do. That's what makes you look fat. Oh, and shut up, you sexist pig. There were 3 other theoretical nonverbal mechanisms they studied: physically trapped, hypergaze from a grid of staring faces, and the cognitive load from producing and interpreting nonverbal cues. That's a very easy solution, you know. Just don't pay attention. If you spend the whole meeting playing video games, you're not going to be looking at all these other people. They're probably all doing the same thing. While they make a big deal of these in the paper, their own study found these did not come close to the mirror effect. This being current year, the researchers felt the need to introduce a racial component to the study, even if there wasn't one. It's true, it is current year, you can't skip that. A question: the study was designed to be about gender, but you were also surprised that race appeared to matter too. An answer: yeah, we saw that participants of color reported greater Zoom fatigue than white participants. To put it into perspective, the gender effect is 10 times the size of the race effect. And then they got a bar from the study. Hardly any difference whatsoever. But whatever. So nothing useful can be drawn from this graph. Does that matter? Of course not. So still, it's extremely important to look into that and to study this potential race effect in much more depth. This sounds to me like someone is desperately trying to maintain their job, huh? Actually, the author of this article caught on too. Important for your next grant, that is. I see the proposal now. Systemic white supremacy and Zoom fatigue, the structural racism and whiteness in video conference calls. I could totally see them doing that. Question: is there something that companies should be doing to alleviate Zoom fatigue or that individuals can do? It's actually very easy. Go to audio only unless you, for whatever reason, require to see these people's faces. That's what my company does, and it makes these meetings so much more tolerable. And the answer: one way to reduce fatigue is to shrink the size of the video conference window so you don't have these large faces staring at you. As for the mirror effect, you can disable the self-view so you won't see yourself anymore. Your camera is still on. Everyone sees you. You see everyone, but you don't see yourself. And that could lead to some hilarity, because if you forget your camera's on, you may maybe start picking your nose or something, or start tubing while everyone's watching. It's already bad enough with just audio only, you know. So many times I've almost screamed out in a meeting, like, "Are you fucking stupid?" But luckily I remembered to check if my mic was muted first before I did that. And then I realized, oh fuck, my mic's not been muted for the past like 5 minutes. Oh, thank God I didn't say anything. So to help with mobility, we suggest trying to increase the distance between yourself and the camera, which gives you a bit more room to move. And standing desks are helpful because they allow you to be more mobile during your video conferences. Seems like common sense for the most part, things people could do in their own or even figure out on their own. I've done versions of those things myself. All right, so question. And I guess companies could spread the word about the value of doing these things. And answer: the responsibility for addressing Zoom fatigue should not be placed on individuals, since this could just intensify inequities. Oh my God. Now it's somehow your employer's fault that you can't handle a Zoom call. I don't know, man, but from an employer's perspective, I think this serves as a great filter. Just like that old Dilbert comic when the manager was sending out an email like, oh, because of bad weather, anyone who's not essential can just go home for the rest of the day. And then he goes to the window with his binoculars thinking, man, this is going to be the easiest round of layoffs ever. But anyway, of course it could. What about those predictions? Yeah, so from the very beginning, how did those pan out? So, fatigue is associated with high amounts of video conference usage. You don't say. Suppose they had to add that for completeness, but yeah, that makes sense. And then nonverbal mechanisms, and that women have more fatigue than men, and that mere anxiety mediates the gender difference. So, I don't think they proved any of these things. The survey they used asked about questions about these specific topics. For example, to measure mirror anxiety, they asked questions like, these items were during a video conference. How concerned do you feel about seeing yourself? During the video conference, how concerned would you feel about what other people think of your appearance? And during a video conference, how distracting is it to see yourself? And for what they call hypergaze, they asked this. A single item scale was used to measure the perceived gaze of other participants. Participants were asked to indicate during a video conference, how often do you feel like people are staring at you? Some people are just paranoid, I guess. Yeah, these are leading questions. In fact, I feel like people are staring at me right now, and I'm sitting in a room by myself. Hey, if you're crazy, they never ask that anymore because that would be ableist, I guess. I believe mirror anxiety is a real thing, but this study with its leading questions confined to a handful of topics doesn't prove anything. There is plenty of research on that fatigue or on the fatigue that simply staring at a screen all day can cause, regardless of whether you are on a conference call or not. This study had a goal, and sure enough, it met it. There's a frivolity to quote-unquote research like this. In one sense, it is heartening to know that we live in so rich and prosperous a society that we can conduct largely useless studies like this, much in the way that we can devote large amounts of time and money to silly movies, video games, and the rest. Well, the problem is, as we got more money to devote to that, the content we have available gets worse and worse. Because video games, movies, they're just getting worse on the whole. However, I do question the potential damage that can be done when academia and quote-unquote science become so frivolous and agenda-driven. Well, I think we're already seeing that. The fact that it's scientifically accepted now that biology is a social construct, because no scientist is willing to speak out against it because they're afraid of getting their grants and their budgets cut. It's almost as if they're in the pockets of the politicians, huh? Funny that. Yeah, it's almost as if they don't give the people who hire them the results they want, they won't be hired anymore. Because I'm just going to tell you straight up, if you're a scientist and some very partisan government official or corpo or activist billionaire or whatever, if they're commissioning you, if they're paying you to do a study, it's because they want you to prove their opinion right. And you know exactly the outcome they're expecting. And if you don't give that to them, you're never going to get work again. So if you want to keep getting work, aka those sweet, sweet grant dollars, you're going to keep finding ways to prove these idiots' opinions right. That's the way, that's the state of so-called science in current year. Oh man, I am so excited to tell you guys right now that finally, after about a year of build-up and shilling, we have launched Blade Devil on Indiegogo, and so far it is doing so well thanks to awesome people like you. If you haven't backed it yet, then please check the links in the description and check out Blade Devil on Indiegogo. You will not be disappointed. Looking forward to seeing you there.